The observer had watched 700 different alien races rise and fall across the galaxy. For millions of years it floated in the darkness of space, watching civilizations grow from small planets into great empires, then watching them die and turn to dust. The observer had seen everything. Wars that lasted for centuries, planets destroyed by single weapons, entire species wiping themselves out. But nothing had prepared it for what was about to happen in the Kepler 442 star system. 17 human ships appeared out of nowhere. They came through hyperspace in a pattern that made no sense to the observer. The ships were scattered all over the place, not in neat military lines like every other race would do. Their metal hulls were covered in scars and damage from old battles. These were not new, shiny warships. These were old fighters that had seen too much war. Commander Kale stood on the bridge of the biggest human ship. He was a tall man with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. His face showed no fear as he looked at the enemy ahead. The observer watched him through its sensors and wondered what this human was thinking. The enemy was the Vexthari Empire. Their ships were beautiful and terrible, made of crystal that sparkled in the starlight. Each ship was protected by energy shields strong enough to stop weapons that could destroy planets. The Vexthari had conquered 47 star systems using these ships. They never lost battles. Admiral Vexthari commanded from a ship so big it looked like a small moon. The observer calculated the odds of this battle. The Vexthari had better weapons, stronger shields, and more ships. The humans had almost no chance of winning. The odds were 14,000 to 1 against them. On the human flagship, Tactical Officer Nara moved quickly between computer screens. Her fingers flew over the controls as she tried to organize the human fleet. The observer watched her work and noticed something strange. She looked calm. Most beings would be terrified facing such odds, but Nara worked with steady hands and clear eyes. Down in the engine room, Engineer June was doing impossible things to the ship's power systems. He was connecting wires that should never be connected, and routing energy through systems that were not designed for it. Everything he did broke the basic rules of safe engineering, but somehow it worked. The observer had never seen anyone modify a spaceship during battle before. The observer had seen this pattern many times before. A young race would win a few small battles and think they were ready to fight the big empires. They would charge into battle full of courage and die quickly. The observer expected the humans to do the same thing. They might be brave, but courage alone could not defeat superior technology and overwhelming numbers. But something was different about the humans. The observer checked their life signs and found something unexpected. When most races faced certain death, their bodies would flood with fear chemicals. Their brains would shut down from terror. But the humans showed different patterns. Their brain activity was increasing. They were not afraid. They were excited. In the medical bay, Dr. Hana checked the vital signs of her crew. She expected to see hearts beating fast with fear. Instead, she saw something that puzzled her. The crew was calm. Not the calm of people who had given up hope, but the calm of people who knew exactly what they had to do. The Vexthari fleet began moving forward. Their crystal ships moved in perfect formation. Every ship was exactly where it should be for maximum fighting power and minimum risk. It was like watching a beautiful, deadly dance. This formation had conquered dozens of worlds. Commander Kale opened a communication channel to all 17 human ships. His voice was quiet but strong as he spoke to his people. The observer listened and translated his words. What it heard surprised the ancient being. Kale did not talk about winning or glory. He did not promise his crews that they would all go home alive. Instead, he talked about protecting the people behind them. He talked about making sure that human space would remain free. He talked about the children who would grow up safe because of what they were about to do. The observer had heard thousands of pre-battle speeches from hundreds of races. Most commanders promised easy victory or great glory. Some threatened punishment for cowardice. But Kale spoke with the voice of someone who had already accepted that he might die today. More importantly, he spoke like someone who refused to accept that his cause could be defeated. The human commander was not trying to inspire his people to win. He was reminding them why losing was not an option. The observer detected no false hope in his words. There was only the absolute certainty that some things were worth any sacrifice. As the distance between the two fleets grew smaller, the observer realized it was about to see something that had never happened before in galactic history. The humans were not charging toward victory or conquest. They were not even fighting for survival in the usual sense. They were moving towards something much more dangerous than simple warfare. The first weapons would fire in just a few minutes. The observer prepared to record what it thought would be the final moments of the human race. It had no idea that it was about to learn why every ancient civilization in the galaxy whispered warnings about humans. It did not know that even beings as old and powerful as itself had learned to be very careful when dealing with this young, strange species. The lesson was about to begin. The first shots fired changed everything the observer thought it knew about war. Admiral Vexithari attacked with perfect coordination. Bright beams of crystal energy shot through space like deadly lightning. Each shot was calculated by computers to hit exactly where it would do the most damage. The observer watched 3 human ships take direct hits that should have turned them into space dust. But something impossible happened. The damaged ships did not explode. They did not retreat like any smart military force would do. Instead, they kept flying forward. Pieces of metal and clouds of air leaked from huge holes in their sides, but they continued to fight. The observer had never seen anything like this in all its years of watching wars. Engineer June's voice crackled over the radio as he worked miracles in the engine room. He was using the air conditioning system to keep people alive when the life support failed. He was making weapons work by connecting them to the navigation computer. Nothing he did should have worked, but somehow it did. Commander Kale gave an order that made no sense to the observer. Instead of keeping his ships together in a proper military formation, he told them to scatter in all directions. Some ships dove down below the other ships, others spiraled up in crazy patterns. Some ships flew sideways in directions that had no military purpose at all. Tactical Officer Nara somehow managed to coordinate this chaos. She kept track of 17 ships flying in completely different directions and made it work like a plan. The observer was impressed by her ability to think in 3 dimensions, while everything around her was exploding. The Vexithari fleet was confused. Their computers were designed to fight enemies who followed logical military tactics, but the humans were not following any tactics that made sense. The crystal ships kept trying to aim at human vessels, but the humans appeared in places where no smart commander would ever put a ship. Admiral Vexithari sent increasingly angry messages to his ships. His perfect formation was falling apart because he could not predict what the humans would do next. The alien computers kept calculating where human ships should be, but the humans were never where they should be. The observer noticed something very strange about human biology during this fight. When most races faced extreme danger, their thinking became slower and more confused. Fear chemicals would flood their brains and make them stupid, but the humans were different. The more dangerous the situation became, the better their brains worked. They were actually getting smarter as the battle got worse. Dr. Hana reported impossible statistics from her medical bay. Crew members were working perfectly even though they had injuries that should have knocked them unconscious. Some people were functioning normally with broken bones and deep cuts that would have crippled any other species. What really shocked the observer was how humans treated their own lives. When the destroyer Soul's Pride lost its engines and life support, the crew did not abandon ship like any sensible people would do. Instead, they turned their dying ship into a giant missile. They used small thrusters to aim their ship at the enemy formation and crashed into 2 Vexithari cruisers. The crew of Soul's Pride had 8 seconds to escape in lifeboats. They used those 8 seconds to make sure their aim was perfect instead of saving themselves. The observer recorded their final radio transmissions. The crew sounded satisfied, not afraid. They were happy that their death would help their friends win the battle. Admiral Vexithari's formation began to break down. The crystal beings had always won battles by being smarter and having better weapons. They had never fought an enemy that treated their own survival as less important than completing their mission. When the human cruiser Busan's Fury deliberately crashed through a Vexithari energy barrier, the alien admiral's computers started showing error messages. Engineer June became more creative as the battle continued. He connected the weapon targeting system to the environmental controls. He used the artificial gravity generators as improvised weapons. He even managed to make the coffee makers boost the ship's shield somehow. His solutions broke every rule of physics, but they worked because he refused to accept that they could not work. The observer realized that human tactics were evolving in real time. Every few minutes, the humans learned something new about how the Vexithari fought. Then they immediately changed their own fighting style to take advantage of this new knowledge. Tactical Officer Nara discovered that the alien shields had a 3-second gap when they rotated. Within minutes, every human gunner had adjusted their shooting to hit during that tiny window. The humans were not just fighting to win this battle. They were fighting to learn everything they could about their enemies. Every explosion, every hit, every near miss taught them something new. The observer watched them turn the battle itself into a classroom, where the lesson was how to kill Vexithari more efficiently. Admiral Vexithari sent a message offering the humans honorable surrender terms. He promised to let them leave peacefully if they would just stop fighting and go home. Commander Kale's response was broadcast on all radio frequencies so both fleets could hear it. Kale thanked the Admiral politely for his generous offer. Then he explained why the humans would not accept it. The humans had not come here to win or lose, he said. They had come to teach the Vexithari Empire what happened when someone threatened humanity. The observer heard no anger in Kyle's voice. No hatred or desire for revenge. He spoke like a teacher explaining a lesson to a student. The lesson was simple. Attacking humans was a mistake that carried a very high price. As the second wave of fighting began, the observer started to understand that this battle was different from every other war it had ever watched. The humans were not fighting for territory or resources or even survival. They were fighting to make sure that every alien in the galaxy would think twice before threatening human space. The real education was about to begin. The change in human fighting happened so fast that the observer almost missed it. What had looked like desperate chaos suddenly revealed itself as a carefully planned strategy. The humans had been learning during every moment of the battle. They had studied every Vexithari response and found weaknesses while appearing to fight just for survival. Engineer June made a discovery that changed everything. He realized that the crystal ship's energy shields worked by vibrating at specific frequencies. When the alien ships flew too close to each other, their shields interfered with each other and became weaker. June modified his ship's communication system to broadcast signals on those exact frequencies. The observer watched in amazement as human ships that should have been helpless began making Vexithari shields flicker and fail just by sending radio signals. Commander Kale's brilliant strategy became clear as the battle continued. His seemingly random ship movements had actually been careful tests. He had been probing the limits of how the Vexithari would respond to different attacks. Now he began using a plan that turned the aliens' mathematical precision against them. Human ships would pretend to retreat, drawing Vexithari vessels into chase formations that exposed their weak sides to hidden human squadrons. Tactical Officer Nara showed an incredible ability to think in 4 dimensions during combat. She could predict what the Vexithari would do 3 moves ahead. She did not use superior computers or technology. Instead, she had an almost magical understanding of how thinking beings react when they are under pressure. Her targeting solutions made no sense to computer programs, but they worked perfectly every time. The observer detected something remarkable in human brain patterns during this phase of fighting. Where other species became slower and more confused as stress increased, human brains seemed to enter a special enhanced state. Dr. Hana reported crew members performing complex tasks with superhuman efficiency, while running on very little sleep and almost no food. Admiral Vexithari's confusion became obvious in his increasingly panicked commands. The crystal beings had achieved dominance across the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming force applied according to proven mathematical rules. They had never encountered an enemy that could turn warfare into an art form. The humans treated each fight as a chance for creative problem-solving, rather than a simple exchange of gunfire. The humans began using tactics that violated every rule of civilized combat. They used damaged ships as fake targets, broadcasting false life signs to trick Vexithari rescue ships into ambush zones. They converted cargo containers into improvised weapon platforms and scattered them throughout the battlefield like hidden mines. Most disturbing to the observer, they began using their own wounded vessels as bait, knowing that enemy fire would concentrate on ships that appeared helpless. Engineer June's modifications reached levels of inspired madness that defied both logic and physics. He connected the ship's waste recycling system to the main engines and somehow achieved a 15% boost in speed. He used the medical bay's surgical lasers as defensive weapons against incoming missiles. He even convinced the navigation computer to calculate firing solutions by treating enemy ships as dangerous asteroids that needed to be destroyed. The observer, noted that human adaptability worked on multiple levels at the same time. Individual crew members learned and adjusted their techniques within minutes of facing new problems. Ship systems were modified in real time to counter specific threats. Fleet tactics evolved as commanders shared discoveries across the radio network. Most remarkably, the humans seemed to predict what the Vexthari would adapt to and prepared counter-adaptations before the aliens could even implement their responses. Tactical. Officer Nara made a breakthrough when she realized that the crystal being's greatest strength was also their biggest weakness. Their reliance on mathematical optimization made them predictable to any intelligence capable of creative thinking. She began feeding false information into their targeting computers by having human ships broadcast misleading sensor readings. This caused Vexithari weapons to aim at empty space, while human vessels attacked from completely unexpected directions. The turning point came when Commander Kyle ordered his most damaged ships to surround the Vexithari flagship. Admiral Vexithari found his massive command ship encircled by human vessels that were too damaged to pose a direct threat. Yet somehow these broken ships managed to prevent his escape. The humans had turned protection duty into a form of prison, using their apparent weakness as a strategic advantage. The observer began to understand why ancient civilizations whispered warnings about humanity. These beings did not fight according to any recognizable rules of war. They treated warfare as a chance for creative expression. They turned each battle into a laboratory for testing new forms of controlled violence. As the Vexthari formation began to collapse under pressure from tactics they could neither predict nor counter, the observer realized it was watching something that had never happened before in galactic history. The humans were not just winning this battle. They were changing what victory meant. The crystal ships started making mistakes. Their perfect coordination broke down as individual captains began making decisions based on fear rather than logic. Some Vexithari vessels started firing at targets that were not there. Others stopped firing altogether when they could not understand what the humans were doing. Engineer June created his masterpiece when he connected 17 different broken systems into a single weapon that should not have existed. He used parts from destroyed computers, wiring from damaged lights, and power from the emergency life support system. The weapon he built violated every law of engineering the observer knew, but it worked because Yoon refused to accept that it could not work. Commander Kale's final tactical innovation was to make his fleet appear larger than it actually was. He had damaged ships broadcast multiple sensor signatures while functional ships turned off their identification systems. The Vexthari found themselves fighting what appeared to be a human fleet, twice the size they had originally faced. The observer realized that human warfare operated on principles beyond physical reality. While other species fought to achieve specific goals with acceptable losses, humans fought to establish mental dominance that would prevent future wars. They understood that the most powerful weapon was not superior firepower, but the absolute certainty that fighting them would result in something worse than any normal defeat. The lesson was almost complete. The observer watched something that challenged everything it understood about the limits of living beings. As the battle grew more intense than any creature should be able to survive, human crew members began operating in ways that should have been impossible. Dr. Hana's medical readings showed people continuing to work with injuries that would have killed any other species in the galaxy. On the bridge of the flagship, Tactical Officer Nara kept perfect control of the entire fleet, while suffering from a head injury that had damaged her brain and made her left eye useless. The blow should have knocked her unconscious, but she continued to create flawless battle plans. When a junior officer suggested she go to the medical bay, Nara responded by destroying 2 enemy cruisers with a single tactical. Maneuver engineer June continued his impossible modifications, while working with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung from when an explosion had thrown him across his workshop. The observer detected dangerous internal bleeding that should have made him collapse within minutes. Yet his creativity and technical skill actually seemed to improve as his body grew weaker. He built a weapon using parts from a broken coffee machine, 2 damaged computers, and pieces of the air conditioning system. This impossible device could punch through Vexithari armor like it was made of paper. The human ability to exceed biological limits went far beyond individual heroics. The observer detected coordinated efforts that made no scientific sense. Crew members with severed spinal cords continued to operate manual controls through pure willpower. People with major brain injuries maintained complex technical functions by forcing their damaged minds to work through conscious effort, alone. Commander Kale himself provided the most disturbing example of human determination defeating physical reality. A direct hit to the bridge had left him with burns covering most of his body and internal injuries that would kill him within hours. Yet he remained at his command station, giving tactical orders with the same calm authority he had shown at the beginning of the battle. The observer watched him coordinate fleet movements while his heart stopped and restarted multiple times. Dr. Hana moved through her medical bay like a force of nature, keeping crew members conscious and working long past the point where death should have claimed them. Her methods violated every rule of medical care the observer had learned from studying hundreds of species. She used drugs that should have stopped human hearts. She performed surgical procedures that had never been attempted on living patients. Somehow, she convinced dying crew members to stay awake through sheer force of personality. The most remarkable aspect of human endurance was not individual courage, but collective determination. As crew members fell, others absorbed their responsibilities without missing a beat. The observer watched a communications officer with a severed arm continue to coordinate fleet movements by using her feet to operate the control panels. An engineer with massive head trauma maintained life support systems by memorizing control sequences he could no longer see clearly. The Vexthari began to show genuine fear as they encountered an enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat even when defeat was mathematically certain. Admiral Vexthari sent increasingly desperate orders to his fleet as human vessels continued attacking with crews that should have been dead. The crystal beings had never fought opponents, who treated death as a minor inconvenience rather than an absolute ending. Tactical Officer Nara made her final breakthrough when she realized the Vexithari could not understand human psychology. The aliens calculated acceptable losses based on logical risk assessment. They assumed their enemies operated under similar mental constraints. When human ships continued fighting with skeleton crews of wounded people, Vexthari computers began producing impossible scenarios that broke their basic programming. Engineer June's ultimate creation violated every law of physics and engineering the observer had witnessed across 700 civilizations. Using parts salvaged from destroyed systems and powered by the ship's emergency life support, he built a weapon that somehow channeled the crew's collective willpower into focused, destructive energy. The observer's sensors detected biological energy being converted directly into weapon power, a process that should have been impossible according to every known law of science. The weapon fired only once, cutting through the Vexthari flagship's armor like a knife through soft material. The observer detected no normal energy signatures, only the unmistakable pattern of human determination made into physical force. Admiral Vexithari's ship, a massive vessel that had survived weapons capable of destroying planets, was cut in half by a device powered by the refusal of dying humans to accept defeat. As the Vexthari formation collapsed into chaos, the observer began to understand the true source of human terror. These beings did not fight according to the rational limitations that controlled every other species in the galaxy. When pushed beyond their breaking point, they simply decided that they had not reached their breaking point yet. The observer realized it was witnessing the birth of a new form of warfare. Victory was no longer determined by superior technology or better tactics, but by the absolute refusal to admit that defeat was possible. The humans had turned their greatest weakness, their fragile biology, into their most terrifying weapon. What made humans truly frightening was not their ability to ignore pain or injury. It was their capacity to exceed every limit that nature had placed on living beings. When their bodies failed, they found ways to keep working. When their minds were damaged, they forced their consciousness to function anyway. When death came for them, they negotiated for more time. The observer had watched countless species fight desperately for survival. But the humans were not fighting for survival in any recognizable sense. They were fighting to prove that some things were more important than survival itself. They were demonstrating that willpower could overcome any physical limitation if the cause was important enough. As human crew members continued to function while clinically dead, maintained by Dr. Hana's impossible medical procedures and their own refusal to stop, the observer understood why ancient civilizations spoke of humans in whispered warnings. These beings had discovered something that threatened the natural order of the universe, the ability to exceed any limitation through pure determination. The battle was ending, but the real lesson was just beginning to sink in across the galaxy. The Vexthari retreat did not begin with tactical withdrawal. It began with absolute terror. Admiral Vexithari's fleet, which had conquered 47 star systems through mathematical precision and overwhelming force, fled in complete panic from an enemy they could no longer understand or predict. The crystal beings' fear became obvious when they abandoned their wounded ships, rather than risk meeting human boarding parties. The observer detected frantic radio transmissions between Vexithari vessels as their commanders tried to explain why they were running away from an enemy force that, according to all logical calculations, had already been defeated. The alien admiral's final message before jumping to hyperspace was filled with repeated warnings about humans who fought like living nightmares and creatures that death itself could not stop. Commander Kale's final orders to his fleet showed the terrifying calculation behind human madness. Instead of chasing the fleeing enemy, he directed his remaining ships to salvage everything possible from the battlefield. Human crews, many of whom were operating while technically dead, worked with mechanical efficiency to strip the abandoned Vexthari ships of technology, weapons, and intelligence information. The observer watched dying humans work methodically to ensure their sacrifice would benefit future generations. Dr. Hana continued her impossible work, even as the battle ended. The observer's sensors detected her keeping brain function active in crew members whose bodies had completely shut down. Her medical bay had become a place where the line between life and death was treated as a minor administrative detail. People who should have been corpses continued to perform essential tasks while Hana somehow maintained their consciousness through pure medical wizardry. Engineer June's final creation was, perhaps, the most disturbing thing the observer witnessed during the entire battle. As his own life faded away, he used his remaining strength to build a message probe containing complete technical specifications for every modification he had developed during the fight. The probe was designed to copy itself and spread its information throughout human space, ensuring that future human engineers would inherit all of his innovations. The observer realized that what it had thought was desperate improvisation was actually systematic knowledge gathering. Every human modification, every tactical innovation, every psychological insight gained during the battle was being carefully recorded and preserved. The humans were treating their own destruction as a learning opportunity, collecting intelligence that would make future human forces even more terrifying. Tactical Officer Nara's final act was to create a complete analysis of Vexthari weaknesses, tactical patterns, and psychological limitations. Working with vision damaged by brain trauma and hands that shook from massive blood loss, she produced a tactical manual that would turn every future fight with the Crystal Empire into a predetermined human victory. Her analysis included detailed plans for exploiting the aliens' dependence on mathematical optimization and their inability to adapt to creative thinking. The observer detected something unprecedented in the final human radio transmissions. Instead of celebrating victory or mourning their losses, the surviving crew members expressed satisfaction at having completed their educational mission. They had not come to destroy the Vexithari Empire, but to teach it what happened when humans were threatened. The lesson had been delivered with devastating clarity. As the human survivors limped away from the battlefield in ships that barely qualified as space-worthy, the observer began to understand the full scope of what it had witnessed. The humans had not fought to win this particular battle. They had fought to ensure that every future battle would be won before it began. The terror they had created in the Vexthari would spread throughout the Empire, becoming a psychological weapon more devastating than any physical armament. Commander Kale's final log entry was transmitted to human command with his dying breath. The observer listened as he calmly reported mission success, listed lessons learned, and recommended tactical modifications for future fights. His tone suggested he was filing a routine report, rather than delivering final words while bleeding to death in his command chair. The observer realized that human victory was measured not in territory conquered or enemies destroyed, but in the psychological impact achieved. The Vexthari Empire would never again assume easy conquest of human space. More importantly, word of this battle would spread throughout the galaxy, carrying with it a simple message that would reshape politics between the stars forever. The humans had demonstrated that they possessed something no other species could match: the absolute refusal to accept defeat regardless of cost. They had shown that when threatened, they would exceed every biological limitation, violate every tactical principle, and redefine the very nature of warfare itself. As the last human ship disappeared into hyperspace, the observer understood why ancient civilizations whispered warnings about this young species. The humans had not come to this battle seeking victory in any traditional sense. They had come to establish a reputation that would make future battles unnecessary. The psychological warfare had been perfectly executed. Every alien species that heard about this battle would know that fighting humans meant facing an enemy that treated death as a temporary setback and defeat as an unacceptable concept. The humans had turned their greatest apparent weakness, their fragile biology, into their most terrifying strength. The observer detected emergency transmissions from across Vexthari space as news of the battle spread. Panic was setting in throughout the Crystal Empire as military commanders realized they had encountered something that their technology and tactics could not counter. The humans had not just won a battle. They had broken the enemy's will to fight. The message was spreading beyond Vexthari space now. Other alien civilizations were receiving reports of humans who fought beyond death, who created impossible weapons from broken parts, and who treated warfare as an opportunity for creative problem-solving. The psychological impact would ripple across the galaxy for generations. The observer understood now that human expansion across the stars was not driven by conquest or colonization in any traditional sense. It was driven by the establishment of a reputation so terrifying that most conflicts could be avoided entirely. The humans had weaponized their own legend. The lesson had been taught. The galaxy had been warned. The human reputation was now carved in the collective memory of every species that valued survival over pride. In the silence that followed the battle, the observer found itself changed in ways it had never experienced before. Across millions of years of watching the rise and fall of 700 civilizations, it had believed it understood everything about warfare, survival, and the limits of what living beings could achieve. The humans had destroyed every assumption in a single fight. The debris field told a story that made no sense according to normal logic. Vexthari ships, technologically superior and vastly more numerous, lay scattered and abandoned. Human vessels, reduced to barely functional wrecks, had somehow achieved complete victory. The observer's vast databases contained no precedent for such an impossible outcome. Mathematics said it should never have happened. As the observer processed what it had witnessed, radio transmissions began arriving from across the galaxy. The Vexthari Empire was in chaos, with Admiral Vexthari's reports spreading panic through their entire command structure. The crystal beings spoke of humans who fought like living nightmares, who treated death as a temporary inconvenience, and who turned their own destruction into a weapon against their enemies. Even more disturbing were reports from other civilizations that had fought humans in previous conflicts. The observer accessed old records that it had previously dismissed as exaggerated war stories. Accounts of human soldiers fighting for days with wounds that should have killed them instantly. Human engineers creating impossible technologies from broken garbage. Human commanders winning battles through tactics that violated every principle of military science. The pattern became clear as the observer analyzed hundreds of years of human conflicts. Every enemy that had fought humanity came away from the experience fundamentally changed. Some, like the Vexthari, retreated in terror and never returned. Others immediately sought peace treaties rather than continue fighting. A few civilizations had voluntarily joined human alliances rather than risk facing them in combat again. The humans had not conquered the galaxy through military expansion, but through building a reputation so terrifying that most wars never began. The observer realized that human warfare worked on principles that went beyond physical reality. While other species fought to achieve specific goals with acceptable losses, humans fought to establish psychological dominance that would prevent future conflicts entirely. They understood that the most devastating weapon was not superior firepower, but the absolute certainty that fighting them would result in something worse than any normal defeat. Engineer June's modifications, which the observer had initially dismissed as desperate improvisation, revealed themselves as examples of a uniquely human approach to solving problems. Humans did not accept limitations as absolute barriers, but treated them as challenges to be overcome through creative application of willpower. Their technology advanced not through gradual improvement, but through revolutionary breakthroughs achieved under impossible pressure. Commander Kale's tactical decisions showed that humans possessed an instinctive understanding of psychological warfare that surpassed any strategic doctrine ever developed. His apparent recklessness had actually been calculated to achieve maximum emotional impact on enemy forces. Every seemingly suicidal maneuver had been designed to plant specific fears in Vexathari minds, creating psychological wounds that would influence every future decision their empire made. Tactical. Officer Nara's innovations revealed that humans could process multiple layers of strategic complexity at the same time while under extreme stress. Her ability to predict enemy movements was not supernatural, but based on a deep understanding of how consciousness reacted when under pressure. The observer realized that human tactical thinking operated on levels that even its own vast intelligence found difficult to understand. Dr. Hana's impossible achievements in keeping critically wounded people functional illustrated the human capacity to redefine biological limitations through pure determination. The observer had watched crew members continue to work long after medical death, kept conscious not through technology, but through collective willpower to complete their mission. The observer began to understand why ancient civilizations had developed such detailed warnings about humanity. These beings possessed something that threatened the fundamental order of galactic civilization, the absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. When faced with insurmountable odds, they simply decided that the odds were not actually insurmountable. As the observer thought about the implications of human expansion across the galaxy, it experienced something it had never felt before in its existence: concern for its own survival. Beings capable of exceeding every biological and logical limitation represented a force that even ancient cosmic entities needed to approach with extreme caution. The humans had not fought this battle to protect their territory or advance their political interests. They had fought to deliver a message that would echo across space and time for millions of years. The message was simple, elegant, and absolutely terrifying. Humanity would not be conquered, controlled, or contained. Any civilization that tried to do so would discover that humans possessed weapons more devastating than any technology: unlimited determination and the complete refusal to acknowledge that defeat was possible. The observer retreated deeper into the cosmic void, adding new safety protocols to its ancient programming. Future observations of human conflicts would be conducted from much greater distances and with far more caution. It had learned why legends trembled before humans, and it had no desire to discover what happened to those who challenged them directly. The galaxy had been educated. The lesson was complete. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity continued its expansion, carrying with it the most terrible weapon ever created: the absolute certainty that they could not and would not be stopped by anyone or anything in the universe.